70 years ago, the nuclear bomb altered our reality forever.
For the first time in human history, we now were capable of our own destruction as a species.
The bomb affects everything.
It was the opening shot of the Cold War.
All U.S. citizens are now going to have to be on high alert.
This is a Conelrad radio alert.
The bomb produces some of the worst psychological tension ever in world history.
An international arms race. Confrontations and close calls. Politics, culture, even sex.
And there was a kind of thrilling excitement about it.
Fire.
Entire industries were created to build it.
This incredible energy opens limitless horizons.
New cameras, film stocks, and techniques devised to photograph it. Now, thanks to state-of-the-art restoration of original film masters, we can see the incredible power of this device in a new way. A technology that has changed human existence forever.
The bomb has receded in the public's imagination, but it's still there.
We still live in its shadow.
Everybody's affected by it. There's no place to hide.
It is an environmental issue, it's a political issue, it's a moral issue. It is the most important issue that we face.
The bomb.
The Bomb was made possible in part by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
It first appeared in the New Mexico desert, a place the Spanish called Jornada del Muerto, Journey of the Dead. Here, miles and miles from anywhere, the bomb came to life. The exact spot is inaccessible, hidden inside a 3,000 square mile weapons range. But for a few hours once every year, it's open to the public.
Thank you. I'll be like Mike Tyson.
They come from all over, like pilgrims to a shrine, to see and stand in the spot where the nuclear age began.
Where the modern era started.
It's probably what it is, turning point.
Be actually at ground zero, where it actually happened.
Well, it's world history too. It changed everything.
The bomb that was tested here 70 years ago turned night into day and set the world on a new and dangerous path. It was a beginning that would lead to over 1,000 nuclear explosions through 5 decades. Test after test in desert landscapes, on tiny islands. A Cold War that brought the world to the brink and produced an enormous stockpile of bombs, most of which could destroy in one instant a city and much more.
60,000 nuclear weapons between the United States and the Soviet Union.
If something should go wrong, the consequences would be catastrophic, not simply for one nation or another, but for mankind.
No less than the discovery of fire, the bomb marks a dividing line between all that came before and everything that follows.
Nuclear war would entail the end of civilization.
This was a millennial change in human affairs. Everyone was at risk.
The force that first appeared on this spot, a power greater than we can imagine. Where did it come from? How did it all start?
The understanding of how the world worked was being revolutionized. And in 1938, in Germany, And it's important to emphasize, in Germany, the greatest revolution of all occurred.
In Berlin, two German chemists, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, discover that bombarding uranium with neutrons creates a different substance, barium. They have no idea why. But a friend, physicist Lise Meitner, suddenly realizes they have split the nucleus of the uranium atom, what she calls fission. Meitner publishes her conclusion in the scientific journal Nature. The news begins spreading through the international physics community.
The implications of that were obvious to physicists all over the world.
Out of a little bit of material, it can produce an enormous amount of energy.
The timing could not be worse. Nazi Germany is on the rise. Adolf Hitler is about to start World War II. As physicists around the world digest Lise Meitner's news, they quickly realize this discovery, nuclear fission, could determine the outcome of the war.
Uranium
can be fissioned
when hit with a neutron,
producing
a tremendous amount of energy.
A lot of energy.
Per Einstein's equation,
E equals mc squared.
Every physicist knew
all over the world
an atomic bomb could be built
by the Nazis.
After all, the discovery had been made in Germany. Germany had very good physicists.
Maybe Hitler's building the bomb.
The threat of Germany getting a bomb first is so unthinkable.
Hey, we're in a race with the Germans, perhaps.
But so far, the race is only in the scientists' minds. No one else understands the danger of a bomb that doesn't yet exist. Physicist Leo Szilard is convinced the only way to stop Hitler is to get the bomb first. Szilard dictates a letter, a warning about the threat of a Nazi atomic bomb.
And he thought that the best strategy would be to get Albert Einstein, the most famous scientist in the world, to sign a letter to the president, Franklin Roosevelt, and get things moving.
Szilard's letter and Einstein's fame do the trick. President Franklin Roosevelt authorizes a project to research uranium. Two years later, the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. Hitler declares war on the U.S. America is fighting two wars, against Germany in Europe, Japan in the Pacific. Suddenly, Roosevelt's uranium research project is critically important. What began as scientific inquiry is about to become a crash program to build a bomb. The bomb had its roots in many places, all of them managed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. In this building, on Broadway in New York City, the engineers set up an office. On the 18th floor, the largest government scientific project in history begins to take shape. To keep its real purpose secret, the project is named after the engineered district where it's located, Manhattan. Ultimately, over 500,000 people will contribute to the Manhattan Project. They'll be led by this man, Leslie Richard Groves, Army engineer. Groves has been in charge of building the Pentagon and internment camps for Japanese Americans. Now he's itching for the next step in his career, an overseas combat assignment. Then Groves gets a surprise update from his boss.
I have a project for you. And Groves realizes what it is. Oh, no, not that thing. No. He's ready to go overseas, and he's very disappointed.
Developing an imaginary bomb based on invisible particles that will probably never work seems like a career dead end.
But, hey, you do what you're told. You do what you're told, and you do it. to the best of your ability. And he put his foot on the accelerator and never let up.
But first, he negotiates a raise.
He says, I'm going to have to be a general. I mean, these scientists aren't going to respect me if I'm just a colonel.
Now he gets to work. Friday, day 1, purchase 1,200 tons of uranium ore. Saturday, negotiate special top priority rating for the project. Monday, meet with Presidential Science Advisor Vannevar Bush. Wednesday, go to Tennessee. Buy 56,000 acres of land for factories. Next, visit universities and meet scientists. Columbia, Harold Urey. University of Chicago, Arthur Compton. Berkeley, California, Ernest Lawrence. Back to Washington. Groves has put in motion what will become a vast industrial complex in less than 2 months. There's only one thing missing: the bomb itself. It'll be years before there's nuclear fuel ready. The uranium is produced one tiny particle at a time. But when that fuel is ready, Groves will need a design for a bomb that works. And for that, he needs scientists. He's been meeting plenty of them at Columbia, Chicago, Berkeley. No question they're smart, but they just rub him the wrong way.
He's a military man, so we've got a clash of cultures here.
Groves was a very smart man and knew a lot about a lot of things, but he didn't know much about physics. He also had a pretty thin skin about people looking down on him who had PhDs, which he didn't have.
Eggheads. He thinks that these guys are up in the clouds. They're not very practical. Their politics are, for the most part, suspect.
They talk too much. What about security here? This is going to be a big secret here. They're blabbing all over the place amongst themselves. They're going to have to be put in shape.
Groves needs a scientist he can work with. Someone who can turn theories into a working bomb, and run a lab, and manage a team of the most brilliant and cantankerous minds ever assembled in one place.
Against the advice of most of the senior physicists in America, he chose Robert Oppenheimer.
Oppenheimer?
Oppenheimer ran graduate seminars of 15 people. That was it.
He couldn't run a hamburger stand. I mean, he had no administrative record.
Groves' security people were totally against Oppenheimer. They were appalled.
His wife's a communist, his brother's a communist, his sister-in-law's a communist.
And yet, the no-nonsense general senses something in this brilliant dreamer that strikes a chord.
Oppenheimer was very good at explaining things. And Oppenheimer explained things so beautifully and so respectfully to General Groves that Groves just was dazzled and decided, this is my man.
It was a brilliant decision and insightful. Oppenheimer understood better than any of the others what needed to be done.
And Oppenheimer saw in Groves something absolutely essential, which was Groves' ability to get Oppenheimer anything he wanted. Any person, any resources, anything.
General Leslie Groves and Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, complete opposites, yet each in his own way a virtuoso, together are made for this moment.
The two of them were bound together, and both saw in each other what I call the route to immortality.
It's 1942. Groves has his lead scientist. Now he needs a special kind of uranium, U-235, the only substance that can make an atomic explosion. Natural uranium, U-238, won't work. and that's a problem.
The uranium that you dig out of the ground has only about 0.7% U-235. So we then had to figure out a way to separate U-235 from U-238. You can't do it chemically because it's all uranium.
Groves builds a huge complex at Oak Ridge, Tennessee to produce U-235. But it's agonizingly slow.
Getting U-235 is not difficult in tiny quantities, but since you have to get them one atom at a time, it is an enormous task to do that.
Just one bomb will need pounds of the stuff. Getting it one atom at a time will take years. But chemist Glenn Seaborg finds another option: plutonium. It can be produced faster than uranium in a nuclear reactor. So Groves builds another complex, reactors at Hanford, Washington, to produce plutonium. But all this will take time. And both wars are going badly. In the Pacific, the Japanese captured the Philippines. They forced 60,000 weak and starving POWs to walk 60 miles with little food or water, the Bataan Death March.
If you stopped, you were killed. If you just couldn't take another step forward, you died. And how did they kill you? Either bayoneted you to death, shot you, or decapitated you, depending on how they felt at that moment.
The war with Germany is just as bad. German U-boats are creating havoc in the Atlantic. Hitler's armies occupy Europe, North Africa, and are hammering the Soviet Union. And no one knows how close the Nazis are to an atomic bomb.
Groves is, of course, consumed by this question of what the Germans are up to.
The Nazis are already committing unspeakable atrocities. If Adolf Hitler gets the bomb, he will be unstoppable. The bomb came out of the minds of men. To create it, they would need isolation, freedom from distraction, and utmost secrecy. Here, deep in the Jemez Mountains, they could think their thoughts, work numbers, follow the equations. Los Alamos, New Mexico, where the scientists worked, was created by and for the bomb. Today, only a few traces of its beginnings remain. An old mess hall, an army barracks, Robert Oppenheimer's house, the main lodge of what was once a private boys' school. In 1942, Oppenheimer tells Groves this is the perfect place for a secret laboratory.
Up on a mesa in the middle of a national forest with only one telephone line to the outside world.
It's isolated. We'll keep these scientists away from what they're used to, and we can keep our eye on them. So they close the school, boom, and we can get going right away.
Now, Oppenheimer must convince some of the best science talent in America to move to the middle of nowhere and live behind barbed wire for the indefinite future.
They needed a good salesman to encourage these people to come to Los Alamos, and Oppenheimer was very good at that.
Eventually, thousands will be recruited to work on the bomb. Hal Bell was an aeronautical engineer. Lily Hornig and her husband Don were scientists. For all of them, joining the project began with a mysterious, cryptic conversation.
Here's this major sitting behind a desk, and he said, I have a very neat job for you, but we only take volunteers. I said, well, tell me about it. He's like, I can't.
Don was asked how would you like another job? Don said, well, you have to tell me a little more. And he said, well, I can't.
Tell me where I'd be. He says, I can't.
Which direction in the country, north, south, west? No, I can't tell you any of that.
Tell me what I'd be doing. He said, I can't. I said, you think I'm going to volunteer? You're out of your cotton-picking mind.
I'm not going to risk my future on something I know absolutely nothing about. That's ridiculous. So he said, Hornig, you know those posters in the post office that Uncle Sam is pointing his finger at you? Don thought that was very corny, but we got the message.
So the next day, I was on my way to Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Yet even in the midst of a national emergency, some assets are ignored.
The women at Los Alamos ran the schools, the libraries, they did a lot of the calculations, but this was a male environment.
Some women do work as typists and machine operators, but of more than 400 scientists at Los Alamos, less than 10 are women. Lily Hornig is one.
They said, how fast do you type? And I said, I don't type. And they said, what makes you think you can have a job? I said, I'm a chemist with a master's degree and a year of work experience. And eventually they turned up a job in the chemistry division. So they took some women, but they made it very clear that we were not top drawer.
The first lesson everyone learns is secrecy. Officially, Los Alamos doesn't exist. It's called Site Y, or the Hill. The bomb is referred to only as the gadget.
You only need to know enough to do your job and no more. And don't be inquisitive about anything more.
Everything was hush-hush, go where you're told, and there was no preliminary information given to me. They knew exactly who I was and why I was there. And that was better than I knew.
I knew very little about the project. I just picked up rumors about their building balloons up there, submarines.
You did not talk about bombs, atoms, uranium. You just didn't say that. My wife didn't know what we were doing.
Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where uranium is produced, has been created nearly overnight.
This was a town that 1 year before had just been a farm and suddenly was a large city with 70,000 people, houses, streets.
Los Alamos, New Mexico is far more remote and much less developed. One of the scientists here, Hugh Bradner, has a movie camera. The Bradner home movies offer a rare glimpse of life at Los Alamos. The films are remarkable because they exist at all. A look inside the most secret facility in the world, hidden deep in the remote West.
Many of these people had come from, urban academic places, and here they were living a rather primitive life.
The living conditions were rough Western. You could turn on the water tap and worms were as likely as water to come out. There was mud during the rainy season. On the other hand, there were parties, and Oppenheimer was a great lab leader, and the punch was spiked with 100% lab alcohol. So it became exciting.
Their average age is 25, and they know their work may be the only thing that can prevent a Nazi atomic bomb.
I came to this country at the age of 12 from Hitler, Germany, and my motivation was very much tied to that.
All of them were told that they could shorten the war through their efforts, and that was enough to know at the time.
By spring 1944, they have a design. It resembles a gun. 2 chunks of nuclear fuel will be slammed together, creating a critical mass and a nuclear explosion. It's simple, but there's not enough fuel to test it. Uranium production is so slow, it will take years to make enough for just 1 bomb. Since plutonium can be produced faster, it is the key to making multiple bombs. The success of the entire project depends on making plutonium work. But when physicist Emilio Segre gets the first tiny sample of plutonium from Hanford, he makes a devastating discovery. A plutonium gun bomb will melt, not explode.
The gun-type plutonium bomb will not work.
It was a disaster. There was just enough uranium for one gun bomb. If you couldn't use plutonium, there would only be one bomb.
Maybe this whole $350 million is going to go for naught because plutonium won't work.
Oppenheimer really considered resigning from Los Alamos at that point.
It's a dead end. Los Alamos scraps the plutonium gun design and starts over. After years of work, they can only count on one uranium bomb. It's summer 1944. The Allies have invaded France, but the outcome is still in doubt. Nazi scientists are introducing frightening new weapons. The world's first jet fighter, a cruise missile, and a supersonic rocket. They could be close to an atomic bomb.
We knew they were working on it, but we didn't know how far along they were.
The war could be lost if Germany got it first.
In Los Alamos, they've got a new approach, a possible way to use plutonium: implosion.
Usually an explosion is outward. This time they're going to push a ball of plutonium and compress it.
Taking a ball of plutonium and using explosives to compress it might be impossible, but it's their only hope.
That was the greatest problem at Los Alamos, how to make plutonium work.
They reorganize the laboratory, and there's a crash program for implosion.
Chemist George Kistiakowsky from Harvard is brought in to work the problem. Kistiakowsky will spend the rest of 1944 and beyond experimenting desperately trying to make implosion work. As complex and daunting as implosion is, Kistiakowsky and his small team will not be nearly enough. They turn to the British, who send some of their scientists to Los Alamos.
Groves wanted all of them vetted for possible security infractions. And the British said, no, they're okay. We'll take care of them.
Among the new arrivals is a quiet and strange refugee from Germany. His name is Klaus Fuchs.
He was a very good physicist. He made interesting suggestions, very cooperative, but a sort of an odd guy, and he made me uncomfortable.
Although no one seems aware of it, besides being brilliant and odd, Klaus Fuchs is a dedicated communist. In a few short years, his presence at Los Alamos will come to haunt Groves and Oppenheimer. By early 1945, the war in Europe is in its final months. Nazi Germany is being squeezed between Americans, British and French on the west, and Soviets on the east. In Los Alamos, the design for the uranium gun bomb is complete. All that's missing is the uranium. There should be enough for one bomb by summer. As for a plutonium bomb, they're still working on implosion. Then, in April, tragedy.
When he heard that his chief was dead, his simple humanity expressed itself in these words to Mrs. Roosevelt: "What can I do to help?"
Now, ultimate authority over the bomb falls to Harry Truman.
My duties and responsibilities are clear. I have assumed them.
But there is one enormous responsibility that's not at all clear. Incredibly, Truman has never even heard of the bomb.
He's got this responsibility that he really didn't know about because Franklin Roosevelt didn't tell him.
He had been the vice president for 82 days. He had met once with Roosevelt, essentially for a picture.
Oh, by the way, here, you're in charge of a project that could end human civilization. Thank you very much.
In May, Germany surrenders. The war in Europe is over. Hitler and the fear of a Nazi atomic bomb, the very things that gave birth to the whole project, are gone. But in the Pacific, the war against Japan is still raging.
The job wasn't done. I was a boy of 7 that spring of 1945, and I remember vividly, there were still young men being killed every day.
The race may have been inspired by fear of Germany, but Japan is now the only enemy and thus target for the bomb. The very first bomb was called the Gadget. After 3 years and $2 billion, this is it. A 6-foot sphere filled with batteries, electronics, explosives, covered with cables to set it off and measure what happens. At its center, a grapefruit-sized ball of plutonium, the core. If this thing works, the world will never be the same. Everything comes down to a test in the New Mexico desert, code-named Trinity. It's July 1945. They've been preparing for months, putting in roads, shelters, and bunkers. Miles of cable. It's the biggest science experiment in history. If it works, they'll set off the world's first atomic explosion. No one has any idea what that will be like. They need to measure, record, photograph everything. Radiation levels, shock waves, temperatures, all unknown. All must be documented.